Hello and welcome to the Bible for Worship at St. Paul Lutheran Church on this third Sunday of Easter, when our gospel lesson is written in John's Gospel, the last chapter, chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far off from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Oh, how many questions this chapter raises, this passage of the last chapter of John's Gospel. One might think if the resurrection is the answer to something, how can there possibly be so many questions raised by this story about the resurrected Jesus meeting 7 of his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias? And the questions come because the images are so rich. Just in the first 14 verses, the first 2 scenes of this passage, the disciples fishing, back at their old profession. the question of whether they're fishing on the right side or the left side of the boat, why these professional fishermen had found no fish all night. The whole question of the fish, the huge haul of fish, and yet the nets were not breaking. Peter being told by the beloved disciple, "It is the Lord," and then leaping into the sea, while the rest of the fishermen row the boat ashore. But before Peter leaps, putting clothes on to jump into the sea because he was naked? What do all of these images mean? Who are the other disciples, these other two? Where are the other four of the 11 who were left, who seem not to be present or noticed at all by the story? And Jesus, already on the shore, with a fish breakfast on the fire, and then inviting the disciples to bring their fish to add to it. And Peter, again, taking the lead, going to the boat, dragging the net ashore by himself with a haul so big one might think the nets would break, yet they didn't. And who counted 153 fish? And then they dared not ask him if it was Jesus because they knew. What's the dare in asking something you know? What does it mean to ask, "Are you the Lord?" And then, of course, a meal with Jesus. We know about meals with Jesus in the church. Jesus serves bread and fish. There are the fish again. And finally, John's tagline to these two scenes. This was now the third time Jesus had appeared to the disciples. Each of these images is so rich in its associations, so powerful in their suggestiveness, that interpreters down through the years, preachers and teachers and Christian readers of this chapter have found every possible kind of reference in it regarding the life of the early church. This whole of chapter 21 seems pretty clearly to be an expansion on a form of John's gospel that had already come to a conclusion at the end of chapter 20. There in verses 30 and 31, John's gospel read, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name." And there we expect the book to end. But chapter 21 says, "After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way." Differently, perhaps, from the ways that others had seen him previously. And indeed, in these first 14 verses, all of these references that seem closed to us in so many ways, and yet probably were fairly transparent to John's first readers as references to people, images, traditions, dynamics within John's own community. And for the most part, even looking at cross-references within John's gospel, we remain largely outsiders to what these references specifically are about. Interestingly, it's hard even to find what the point of these two scenes is, because at the end, Jesus simply gives them the food to eat, and John reports this was the third time he appeared. But to what end this third appearance? It remains something of a mystery. In verses 15 through 19, the third scene in this passage, things become a bit clearer for us, because 3 times Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter, characteristically a bit irritated by the end of the 3rd question, keeps saying, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus offers him the commissioning commands: feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. 3 times Jesus asks Peter to confess that he in fact loves Jesus. Balancing, we can expect the 3 times in John chapter 18, verses 17, 25, and 27, when Peter denied Jesus, and then the cock crowed. 3 times Peter is offered the opportunity to take back his denial and affirm his love for Jesus. And yet, that affirmation, while leading to the commission to build up the community, also comes with the anticipation that the freedom Peter might have known as a young man will now be seriously constrained, curtailed by those who will seize him and bind him and stretch out his arms. And the parenthetical comment that this was to show by what kind of death Peter would die, we come to understand that he was crucified, as was his Lord. Tradition says that Peter insisted on being crucified upside down, lest he seemed to be trying to imitate his Lord. With all of this, the closed references of the first 14 verses and the clearer but still powerful imagery of verses 15 through 19, what do we finally have? Well, we certainly can say, even with the closed references of the first 14 verses, that Jesus, as the resurrected Lord, is present to the disciples in meaningful ways. So meaningful that if you're not part of that community, you may miss the meaning, even for those who come later in that community. And of course, one that's reasonably familiar, if not in the details of bread and fish, at least in the big picture, this community gathers around a meal with Jesus, provided by Jesus, to which the disciples might add a bit, but for which the main course, so to speak, is provided by Jesus himself. And then in the last 5 verses, this scene with Peter, comes the promise of reconciliation, even from betrayal and denial in the most crucial moments, when it counted the most for Peter perhaps to stand with his Lord, and he could not. But here Jesus offers reconciliation, even from that, and provides the commission to build a community in his name around this meal and the meanings that we find when we encounter the resurrected Jesus. By the Sea of Tiberias, on the banks of the Mississippi, in our own homes and neighborhoods and communities of faith. God bless.